10-year-old Tommy arrived to his first Little League baseball practice, carried on a wooden carrier over the rear fender of his teenaged neighbor boy's bicycle. Tommy was not on my roster, but the friend who brought him said, "Tommy really needs something. He doesn't have much at home, and though the sign-up is over, I ask if Tommy could be placed on a team, and they put him on your team." I always thought God made sure that in a blind draw, every card I took with a boy's name on it was little and scrawny and had never played baseball in his life. Those were the boys I seemed to gather on my team, and so Tommy fit right in. He got there just in time to hear me give my opening speech, in which I said, "Boys, the fun of baseball is hitting the ball, but you can't hit the ball if you don't swing the bat." Now, the reason you don't swing the bat is you're afraid. First, you're afraid of the ball. Well, I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard. And if it hits you, it's going to hurt. But that's all right. We'll take care of you. But the biggest fear is you're afraid if you swing, you'll miss. And if you do that 3 times, you've struck out. So you're going to go up to bat, and you're going to let the pitcher fail instead of you. You're going to take all the pitches and hope that you walk, and then go prancing down to first base like you've done something really great. Well, I said, if you swing, you're going to swing at bad pitches, and I'm going to give you a solemn promise. You will never hear me say it's too high, it's too low, wait for good ones. If the ball bounces and you want to swing at it, swing at it. If it's over your head and over the catcher's head, hits the backstop on the fly, and you swing at it, I'm not going to yell at you. And the reason is very simple, boys. This is the best learning experience you will have between the ages of 10 and 12, because nothing teaches you how to deal with failure better than baseball. When you go back to school in September and you get your first math test and you go home and you have 30%, you're not going to run in and say, "Mom, I got a 30%. I'm on my way to the Math Hall of Fame." But you achieve a 30% success rate in baseball, and you do it for 20 years in the major leagues, and you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. Who has the most hits ever? Pete Rose. Who has the most outs ever made? Pete Rose. Before steroids, who had the most home runs ever? Babe Ruth. Who holds the major league record still for the most strikeouts in a career? Babe Ruth. This is a wonderful game. It tolerates failure, because it teaches you, if you strike out your first at bat, forget it. It doesn't matter. Concentrate on the next at bat. You're always thinking about what's next. Well, it theoretically is a good speech, but you know, when you strike out, it still hurts pretty bad. And Tommy came to every practice, and we got ready to play our first game, and I said, Tommy hasn't touched the ball in any batting practice. I could put the ball on a tee and have Tommy swing at it, and he couldn't hit it. And I said, I give these guys little points to try to reward them. If they swing and miss, they get a point. So, I try to create artificial ways of success. I don't know how to do it for Tommy, because if the ball ever touches his bat during the 14 games we're going to play, it will be a miracle. I mean, it'll be right up there with Moses and the Red Sea. I'm telling you, this boy, there's no way I can teach him how to hit a baseball. But Tommy got up for his first at bat, And I was coaching at first base. And the first pitch came in, and Tommy swung the bat. Now, I can exaggerate. All the stories I tell aren't exactly the truth. But this one is. He swung the bat, and so help me God, he hit right on the very end. I mean, you know, a pool cue, when you go like that, you expect to hit the ball on the very end of the stick. A baseball bat, right on the very end. Now, he didn't hit it real hard, and he didn't hit it real far, but it had such spin on it that when it made its way slowly in the air down to the first base line, the first baseman made a drastic mistake. He should have just walked in and caught the ball. It would have been easy, but he didn't. He decided he would take it on the hop. The only problem was it had so much spin on it, when the ball hit the ground, it shot right. And it was past first base, so even though it was down the right field line, it was a fair ball. And so the first baseman took off after it, and the right fielder took off after it, and we played on kind of rough fields. I mean, a tuft of grass here, a rock here, whatever. Every time that ball hit something, it was spinning so much that it would change directions. The boys, after the ball, gave up trying to field it or even pick it up. They started swatting at it with their gloves, and it looked like two guys, it looked like they were cats trying to catch a mouse with their paws. And finally they stopped it, and they picked it up, and I looked, and there's Tommy standing on second base. And I didn't say it out loud, but I said, thank you, God, I was getting a little weak on this miracle stuff. Tommy's grinning, but inside I'm saying, I just saw a miracle. I don't know what happened to Tommy. I don't know what kind of life he ever lived. But overcoming fear is the biggest obstacle that we have all throughout our lives. Mark Twain once wrote, no human life ever lived, no matter how much achieved, doesn't secretly think itself a failure. I was a pastor for 40 years. I'm trying it one more time. And living internally with the fear that some of you are going to find out that I'm an imposter. Well, I am. What right do I have to speak about God and for God more than any of you? None other than our shared common humanity. So can you believe at this moment when Jesus told this parable, as he looked out at that crowd like I'm looking at you, he saw doubt in their eyes. He saw they thought he was a failure. He felt like he was a failure. I like Mark because it has these human situations about Jesus. And then something happened. Now, this is my imagination. This is the way I think it could have happened. He's in the boat. The crowd's on the shore. They're all looking at him as if to say, okay, big boy, say something that wows us. And Jesus looks up on the hillside, and in the distance he can see just an ordinary Palestinian agricultural scene. There was a guy with a burlap bag and a strap over one shoulder, looks something like a gigantic purse, and it's filled with grain. And he's out taking a step and sowing seed, broadcast we call it, putting his hand in the bag, sowing the seed. And Jesus tells this parable. The seed in the soil. But it's not really about the seed in the soil. It's about the sower. Now, if we look at the parable, we can say, well, this is not a very smart farmer because, after all, he put seed on land that's unproductive. But remember this. In Palestine in the first century, they put the seed down before they plowed. The hard ground came after the winter wheat was harvested. People would use a cut-cross path of that field, and people cutting across the path over the course of several months would create hardness. And so the farmer sowed his seed there because he's going to take his plow, even a one-bottom wooden plow. He was going to take his plow and he's going to plow up the hardness. And some of it inevitably fell upon rocky soil. The soil in Palestine is a little bit like New Hampshire. You can't grow winter wheat here. First of all, you can't find enough seed of soil that has depth. They don't call it the Granite State for nothing. And in Palestine, there was a Jewish legend that said when God created the earth, he gave an angel a bag, and it was full of rocks. He said, scatter these throughout all of the earth. But when the angel was flying over Palestine, there was a hole that ripped in the bag, and all the rocks fell out there. Well, over a period of time, there's dust and dirt, and it looks like good soil. You can't tell the rock formations underneath. And so the farmer sows that as well. And the field's all been cut off where there were thistles last year. Maybe this year with the plowing, he can root up some of the roots of the thistles and turn that which is unproductive into productive soil. But the upshot is some of it will find good soil, and it brings forth a harvest. Do you know what the average harvest yield of winter wheat was for a farmer in first century Palestine? How many fold? Could they get a 30-fold yield? How many say yes, they could get 30-fold? You don't know. That's all right. Overcome your fear. Take a guess. I'll tell you. The average was 10-fold. A 10-fold yield. So here's this guy telling a story about a farmer, and they're right with him. They don't think the farmer's wasting his effort sowing seed on the whole field. That's not what they object to, but they can't believe the yield results. Not when the average yield is 10-fold. This guy is talking about 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. The yield is a miracle, far beyond what nature can produce. I had a farmer in the church in Vincennes, Indiana, that used to farm 2,000 acres in the best fertile river bottom soil in southern Indiana. His farm lay right at the confluence of the White River and the Wabash River. So I asked him one time, what's the best yield result you ever had from winter wheat? And he said, I know what you're doing. I said, well, what? He said, you're talking about that 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. I said, okay, have you ever got 100-fold? He said, no. I said, what's the best you ever got? He said, 85, but I am trusting that before I die, I'll get to 100-fold. Now, can you imagine that? 2,000 years later, in soil far superior to anything in Palestine, using modern agricultural chemicals, and instead of a one-bottom plow, using a widespread plow that had probably 10 to 12 bottoms on it. With all of that, you still can't get to 100-fold. Well, Jesus looked back at the crowd after looking at the sower, and he saw people who were hard. They just wouldn't believe. But he would sow the seed anyhow. Who knows? Maybe something down the road would take that seed and cause it to germinate and produce something for the kingdom of God. And he saw people who were shallow. But he would sow the seed and let it fall on them as well. Because who knows who starts shallow that cannot be turned into a person with some depth. And he would sow the seed to the treacherous because Jesus believed that people can change After all, when he came preaching the good news of God, he said, look, change your mind, change your ways. You can go a different direction. Rejoice and receive the gospel of God. And he even attempted, with his last effort, the last thing he did, to win over that treacherous person, Judas, whom he gave the seat of honor at the Last Supper, and whom he shared the bowl in which, the finger bowl in which they would wash their hands after they ate. So, what of us living today? We've already heard it said 3 times that there's a fear of failure. The trouble, I think, is this. We look at faith as something that can be achieved. Have faith. Faith in that sense is a noun. It's something. It's a thing. Whereas when Jesus looked at the sower, he saw a person living with instinctive trust. There was a bond of trust between the sower and the world God had made. And so the sower sows the seed because he lives in the trust that there will be a harvest. Every time the New Testament uses the word that we translate as faith, it is not a noun, it is a verb. It's never something we have, it's always something we do. And so if it was something that we had and could hold on to, then the theologians would have an advantage, right? And guys that can read the New Testament in Greek could have an advantage, right? Because the more you know about a thing and the more knowledge you have, the more you can control it. Whereas Jesus overcame his fear of failure by simply saying, I don't know what the results will be, but I know if I stay rooted and trusting in the God who sent me, there will be a harvest, and it will be something special. I don't think you ever outgrow that fear of failure. It happens in a variety of ways as we get older. We lose capacity. We lose mobility and hearing and vision and all that other stuff, and we feel guilty. Why do we feel guilty for growing older? Because somehow we feel like we failed. I mean, every other human being that's ever done it has grown older too, if they're fortunate enough to live long enough to grow older, but somehow we grew up with the idea that we could forestall all of that. It would be different with us. I thought that. When I received my doctor's degree, I was really proud of my sheepskin and the chevrons they put on my robe. And then afterwards, Mother gave me a little gift. And it was 8 inches by 8 inches. It was on a varnished piece of plywood, and it was framed, and it had a round medallion that kind of stuck out a little bit from the backing, the plywood backing. It had an Oreo on it, and it said, "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not upon your own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths." Mother didn't say it. I knew she thought I was getting a little uppity. You know? Proud of that piece of paper. The very next week, I got another piece of paper. It was an anonymous note from somebody that said, "You've shown us how smart you are. Now give us some real preaching for a change." I thought about beginning the next Sunday by saying, for whoever wrote that note and objected to smartness, I'm going to give you 20 minutes of stupidity. No, it's not a matter of how smart you are or how stupid you are. It's not a matter of how moral you are or immoral you are. We take this stuff in the Bible, you see, and we go right to the end, the good soil and the bumper crop, and we want to say, be like that. And that's harsh and it's moralistic. I remember a seminary professor who said he went out and preached his first sermon in eastern Kentucky. There wasn't a person there that had graduated from high school. And he said, when I got done preaching, they all just filed out the door. They shook my hand, they smiled, but they didn't say anything. He said, I thought I had preached the definitive sermon, that nobody should ever try to preach another one because this was so good and it explained everything so well. And he said, finally, there was an old woman that had about 2 teeth left in her gums, and she came up to me and she looked at me as she took her hand and she said, Sonny, what if it ain't in you to do it? Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? It isn't in any of us to do it. We don't just decide, well, I'm going to be religious. God isn't religious. I'm going to be Christian. Jesus wasn't a Christian. He saw a sower who trusted in that basic covenant between nature and humanity, going out to plant his field. And Jesus realized that that's the basis for the kingdom. Trust in God. God is trustworthy. Trust in God. And when you, like that old woman, you say, it ain't in me to do it. That doesn't matter. Just take another step. Keep sowing your seed. Live another day with God. Maybe you'll have success, but God promises you this. There will be a harvest. And what you do will have results. So do you want fruits of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness? Then sow the seed. See what God can make of it. Listen. A sower went out to sow. Somebody dealing with his own human sense of fear told that story for you.